You lived an entire, incredibly rich life before the age of 3. You were born into this world. You opened your eyes to the light for the very first time. You heard your mother's voice. You tasted real food. You took your triumphant first steps, and you spoke your very first word. And you remember absolutely none of it. Not a single, solitary moment. If you are like most people, you have a massive, empty black hole where the first 3 to 4 years of your existence should be. Most people assume the answer to this mystery is incredibly simple. Your brain just wasn't ready yet, and you were simply too young to record anything. But that assumption is not quite right, and the real scientific answer is far stranger and far more existential than you would ever expect. Because your baby brain was not failing to record your life, it was actually recording absolutely everything. Your memories were entirely there, perfectly formed, but something inside your own head actively destroyed them. In 1905, the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud became the very first person to put a formal medical name to this universal phenomenon, calling it infantile amnesia. For a long time, science simply assumed that infants were incapable of forming memories. But babies can form memories, and we know this for an absolute scientific fact. In the 1980s, a developmental psychologist named Carolyn Roby Collier at Rutgers University ran a brilliantly elegant experiment to prove it. She tied a soft ribbon from a baby's ankle directly to a colorful mobile hanging above their crib. The babies quickly learned that kicking their legs made the fascinating mobile move, and they absolutely loved it. When she brought those exact same babies back into the lab days later, they remembered the mechanism perfectly. They started kicking their legs immediately. Even 2-month-old infants could hold that specific memory for a couple of days, and 6-month-olds remembered the exact mechanism for weeks. So infant brains can absolutely learn. They can store complex information, and they can recall it later, but those memories simply do not last. By the time you reach adulthood, every single trace of that early life is completely gone. And for decades, the greatest minds in neuroscience couldn't fully explain why. The first part of this mystery's answer is purely structural. The hippocampus, a small, curved structure buried deep inside your brain, is the absolute engine of memory formation. It is the exact biological machinery that allows you to take a lived experience, a birthday party, a deep conversation, or a quiet walk in the rain and encode it as a distinct episode that you can later consciously replay in your mind. In healthy adults, the hippocampus works in tandem with the prefrontal cortex to successfully tag, store, and retrieve these episodic memories. But in infants, this highly complex system is severely underdeveloped. The crucial neural connections between the hippocampus and the cortex are still actively being built. Key anatomical regions, like the dentate gyrus, which acts as a vital gateway for new memories to enter, aren't fully wired together until somewhere between ages 2 and 4. So your infant brain could successfully form short-term memories, it just couldn't permanently move them into long-term storage the way an adult brain seamlessly does. But that structural limitation is only half of the story. And honestly, what developmental neuroscience discovered next is even stranger. Because in 2014, 2 prominent neuroscientists in Toronto discovered something that completely revolutionized how we think about infant memory entirely. Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children had a radical hypothesis that sounded almost absurd at first. They asked, what if the very biological process that physically builds your brain is also the exact weapon that destroys your memories? Here is exactly what they meant. In the very first years of your life, your hippocampus is producing brand new neurons at a completely extraordinary, explosive rate. In biology, this process is called neurogenesis, and it is absolutely essential for your survival. Those millions of new brain cells are exactly what wire up the fundamental circuits you will rely on for the rest of your entire life. But Jocelyn and Franklin strongly suspected that this massive construction project came with a devastating cognitive cost. Every single time a new neuron aggressively integrates itself into an existing neural circuit, it physically disrupts and destabilizes the delicate connections that were already there. The exact connections that were quietly holding your earliest memories? To prove this, they ran a series of complex experiments on mice. When the scientists artificially increased the rate of neurogenesis in adult mice, those adult mice immediately started forgetting things they had previously learned perfectly well. And when they deliberately slowed down neurogenesis in infant mice, those infant mice magically held on to their early memories significantly longer than normal. The results, which were published in the prestigious journal Science, pointed to a deeply counterintuitive and breathtaking conclusion. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold on to its memories. It was simply too busy growing. The massive explosion of new neurons that physically built your brain simultaneously overwrote the delicate memories stored inside it. Your earliest, most precious experiences weren't lost because they were never saved. They were permanently lost because your brain kept aggressively building new rooms and violently tearing down the old walls in the process. But biology is only the foundation. There is another psychological layer to this amnesia, and it might be the most profound part of all. To form what cognitive scientists call autobiographical memory, which is the specific kind of memory where you are the undeniable main character of an experience that you can vividly replay in your mind you need. Something that most people entirely take for granted. You need a sense of self. You have to fundamentally understand that you exist as a distinct person, entirely separate from the world around you, and that events are actively happening to you. Developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage argued heavily in the late 1990s that this is a critical missing piece of the puzzle. Before roughly 18 to 24 months of age, human infants simply do not recognize themselves as distinct individuals. The classic psychological test for this is brilliant and incredibly simple. Researchers put a dot of red rouge on a baby's nose and place them directly in front of a mirror. Before 18 months, babies treat the reflection exactly like it is another random child. They do not reach for the red mark on their own physical face. But after 18 months, a cognitive switch flips. They do. They suddenly recognize that the person trapped in the mirror is them. And that exact moment, the breathtaking birth of self-recognition closely tracks with the earliest possible age at which autobiographical memories can actually begin to form. In other words, you cannot remember being a baby partly because there was literally no you yet. Not in the way that you consciously experience yourself right now. There was no internal narrator inside your head packaging raw experiences into a cohesive story that belonged to a specific person called you. Which raises an incredibly uncomfortable, almost terrifying philosophical question. If you possessed no continuous sense of self, and the physical brain that held your earliest experiences physically rewired itself beyond all recognition, is the baby in your old family photos actually you? Or is it someone else entirely? Someone who briefly lived in the exact same body, but whose fragile mind was literally disassembled and rebuilt, neuron by agonizing neuron, into the person you eventually became. There is one final beautiful piece to this puzzle: language. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson spent years meticulously studying how children form lasting memories, and her conclusion was that language doesn't just describe our memories, it structurally builds them. Before you could speak, your world was encoded entirely as raw sensory impressions. Sounds, textures, visceral emotions, and bright light. But without words to organize them, those chaotic impressions had no solid framework to attach to. Once children finally begin speaking, and especially once they begin having structured conversations with adults about past events, when a parent asks, "Remember when we went to the park?" their ability to form lasting memories improves dramatically. Language gives human memory a skeleton. Without it, your early experiences are exactly like water, with no container. They exist beautifully in the moment, and then they are instantly gone. And this is not just abstract theory. Psychologist Chi Wang at Cornell University discovered that the exact age of your very first memory actually varies depending entirely on your culture. In Western cultures, where parents frequently narrate their children's experiences, asking constant questions, telling personal stories, and aggressively building individual narratives, the earliest memories tend to start around age 3.5. Among the Maori people of New Zealand, whose profound oral tradition places extraordinary cultural emphasis on personal history and communal storytelling, the average first memories reach all the way back to an astonishing age 2.5. Meanwhile, in some East Asian cultures, where early childhood narratives focus significantly less on the individual ego, first memories tend to start much later, closer to age 4 or beyond. The culture you happen to grow up in, literally, physically shapes how far back your own memory can reach. So here is what actually happened to your earliest lost years. Your hippocampus simply wasn't ready to build long-term memories. And even when it finally started to, the explosive flood of new neurons tore violently through the circuits that held them. You had no concept of self to anchor those fragile experiences to, and you had no language to give those experiences a structure that could possibly survive the test of time. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything, all at once. Every single human being who has ever lived went through this exact same erasure. Every person you have ever met has a massive black hole where the very first years of their life should be. And the profound answer to why isn't that your brain was too simple. It is that your brain was doing something far, far more important than remembering. It was becoming you. And that extraordinary creation required, quite literally, destroying the person who came before. If you find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about your own mind, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. In our next video, we are going to look at the other side of this timeline. What exactly happens in your brain during the final 60 seconds of your life? And why might the moment of your death actually be the most alive your mind has ever been? The astonishing truth of what happens after we die is waiting for you. Keep questioning your programming, and I will see you next time.